In the Shadow of Silence, Part 1. I never believed the stories my grandmother told about our house. She said that before it became our property, the land belonged to a family that mysteriously disappeared in the 1970s. People in the area avoided talking about it, but rumors persisted in the whispered conversations of the elders. I've lived alone in this remote house for 3 years, situated on the border between a small rural town and an extensive area of dense forest. The property is old, with thick walls and a basement I rarely visit. I work remotely as a software developer, which allows me to live in this relative isolation, with neighbors at least a mile away. Solitude has never bothered me. In fact, I've always preferred it to the chaos of the city. It was on a winter Thursday when everything began. A storm had been battering the region for 3 consecutive days, and the internet connection kept fluctuating. The clock showed 11:47 p.m. when I finished my work and closed my laptop. The rain violently struck the windows, and the wind howled through the cracks of the house, producing that high-pitched sound that always gave me chills. I was preparing for bed when I heard it, a subtle sound, almost imperceptible beneath the roar of the storm. It sounded like a slow, methodical scratch against wood. Initially, I attributed it to the natural movement of the old house under the weight of the rain. But something about that sound deeply disturbed me. It was too deliberate. I remained motionless in my bed, straining my ears. The scratching continued, now more rhythmic, coming from the hallway leading to my bedroom. My heart raced. I tried to convince myself it was just a tree branch scraping against the side of the house, though I knew there were no trees close enough for that. Slowly, I reached for my cell phone on the nightstand. The device's light revealed it was 12:22 a.m. No signal. The storm had probably knocked down the communication towers in the area. I was completely isolated. The scratching stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was somehow more terrifying than the noise. I held my breath, waiting. Then I heard something else, a soft thud, like someone carefully setting their foot down on the old wooden floor, attempting not to make a sound but failing. Another step followed, then another. Someone or something was walking down my hallway. My instinct was to call out, to demand to know who was there, but fear froze my vocal cords. Instead, I slid out of bed as quietly as possible and grabbed the baseball bat I kept under the bed frame, a precaution my father had insisted upon when I told him I was moving to such an isolated location. The wooden floorboards creaked slightly under my weight as I positioned myself beside the bedroom door, which I'd left partially open earlier. The footsteps paused for a moment, as if whoever was out there had heard me move. My grip tightened around the bat, knuckles turning white. The silence stretched on, interrupted only by the violent storm outside and the deafening thud of my heartbeat. Then, slowly, the footsteps resumed, getting closer to my door. A shadow appeared in the narrow gap between the door and its frame, a dark silhouette cast by what little moonlight managed to filter through the storm clouds and windows. The figure stood motionless outside my door, seemingly hesitating. I could hear shallow breathing now, quick and uneven. Not the breathing of someone who had broken in to steal. This was excited, almost eager. The doorknob began to turn, slowly, quietly. I raised the bat, prepared to swing as soon as the intruder entered. But then, something unexpected happened. A whisper came through the door, so quiet I almost thought I'd imagined it. "Emma?" My blood ran cold. That was my name, spoken in a voice I didn't recognize, raspy and distorted, as if forced through damaged vocal cords. How did they know who I was? "I know you're awake, Emma. I can hear you breathing." The voice was closer now, as if the person had pressed their lips against the crack of the door. I remained frozen, too terrified to respond or move. "I've been watching you for weeks. You live such a structured life. Wake up at 6:30, coffee at 7, computer work until noon, lunch for exactly 45 minutes, more work, dinner at 7, TV until 10s. So predictable." A wave of nausea washed over me. The thought of being observed, studied for weeks without my knowledge, made me feel violated in a way I couldn't articulate. Who was this person? What did they want? "But tonight is different," the voice continued. "Tonight, the storm has changed everything. No phone signal, no internet, No one to hear you if you scream, just you and me, Emma, the way it was always meant to be. The door began to push open, torturously slow. I tightened my grip on the bat, preparing to defend myself. But as the gap widened and the intruder began to step into the room, the power in the house suddenly surged. The bedside lamp I'd left on flickered violently before the bulb burst with a pop, sending the room back into darkness. In that brief moment of illumination, however, I caught a glimpse of something that sent ice through my veins. A face, pale and gaunt, with eyes that reflected the light like those of a nocturnal animal. The momentary distraction of the bursting bulb gave me an opening. I swung the bat blindly in the direction of the intruder, connecting with something solid. There was a grunt of pain, followed by the sound of someone staggering backward. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I bolted past the shadowy figure, down the hallway and toward the front door. The house was pitch black, but I knew every inch of it. 3 years of living alone had made me intimately familiar with each creaky floorboard, each piece of furniture. I navigated through the darkness, with one hand trailing along the wall, heart pounding in my chest. Behind me, I could hear movement, the intruder recovering, pursuing. Their footsteps were no longer cautious or measured, but hurried and heavy. "You can't run from me, Emma," the voice called out, closer than I expected. "This house has always been mine. You're just a temporary guest." I reached the front door and fumbled with the lock, fingers trembling so violently I could barely manipulate the deadbolt. Finally, it gave way with a click that seemed deafening in the tense silence between thunderclaps. I yanked the door open, ready to sprint into the storm, better to face the elements than whatever was behind me, but what I saw made me freeze in my tracks. Standing on my porch, drenched from the rain, was a police officer, his hand raised as if he had been about to knock. "Ma'am," he said, clearly surprised by my sudden appearance. "I'm Officer Daniels. We've had reports of a suspicious individual in the area. Just doing wellness checks on the isolated properties. Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." Relief flooded through me. "There's someone in my house," I gasped, stepping onto the porch. "They broke in. They knew my name. They've been watching me." The officer's expression shifted from surprise to concern. He reached for the flashlight on his belt. "Stay here," he instructed, drawing his weapon. "I'll check it out." I stood shivering in the rain as Officer Daniels entered my home, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness inside. After what felt like an eternity, he returned, holstering his weapon. "There's no one there, ma'am. I checked every room, including the closets. House is clear." "That's impossible," I insisted. "I heard them. I saw someone. I hit them with my bat." The officer gave me a look I recognized all too well, the look people give when they think you're becoming unhinged. "Maybe it was just the storm playing tricks on you. These old houses make all kinds of noises when the weather gets bad." "No, you don't understand. They knew my name. They said they'd been watching me for weeks." Officer Daniels' expression softened with pity. "Look, why don't you come down to the station with me? You can get warm, have some coffee, and if you're still concerned, we can send another unit to do a more thorough sweep of the property." I knew arguing would be pointless. Either the intruder had somehow escaped before the officer arrived, or worse, much worse, the officer didn't believe me. I nodded reluctantly and followed him to his patrol car, casting one last glance at my darkened house. As we pulled away, I could have sworn I saw a figure standing at my bedroom window, watching. But when lightning flashed a moment later, illuminating the facade of the house, the window was empty. At the police station, Officer Daniels was kind enough. He made me coffee and filed a report, though I could tell from his demeanor that he didn't think there had been an actual break-in. He attributed my experience to a combination of isolation, the violent storm, and possibly stress from work. "Happens more than you'd think," he assured me. "People living alone in remote areas during bad storms. The mind plays tricks." I nodded, not wanting to argue, but I knew what I had experienced was real. The voice, the face in the darkness, those weren't hallucinations. It was nearly 3 a.m. when another officer offered to escort me home. The storm had finally begun to subside, though rain still fell steadily. As we approached my house, I felt a growing sense of dread. Something wasn't right. Even from a distance, I could tell. "Stop the car," I said suddenly. The officer slowed. What's wrong? The lights in my house, they're on. And indeed they were. Every single light in my house appeared to be blazing, visible through the windows despite the curtains I always kept drawn. I distinctly remembered the power surge that had blown the bulb in my bedroom lamp. Even if the power had come back on, I hadn't left any lights on when I fled the house. Maybe your power came back, the officer suggested, but I could hear uncertainty in his voice. As we pulled into my driveway, another detail caught my attention. My front door, which Officer Daniels had surely closed when we left, now stood wide open. Stay in the car, the officer instructed, his hand moving to his holster as he exited the vehicle. I watched through the rain-streaked window as he approached the house cautiously, drawing his weapon as he neared the open door. He disappeared inside, and I counted the seconds, then minutes, that he was gone. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The rain continued to drum on the roof of the patrol car, and anxiety clawed at my chest. What was taking so long? The house wasn't that big. Even a thorough search shouldn't take this much time. At the 15-minute mark, I made a decision. I couldn't sit there any longer. I opened the car door and stepped out into the rain, my eyes fixed on the open doorway of my home. No movement, no sound except for the persistent rainfall. "Officer," I called out, my voice barely audible over the weather. No response. I took a tentative step toward the house, then another. Each step seemed to take tremendous effort, as if my body was physically resisting getting closer to the building. By the time I reached the porch steps, I was trembling, and not just from the cold rain soaking through my clothes. "Officer," I called again, louder this time. Still nothing. I stood at the threshold, peering into the brightly lit interior of my home. Everything looked exactly as I had left it, except for one detail. On the hardwood floor of the entryway was a wet trail of footprints leading deeper into the house. Just one set, the officers coming in, but none going out. The logical part of my brain told me to run, to get back in the patrol car and drive to the station. But another part, the part that needed answers, pushed me forward. I stepped inside, following the wet footprints. They led through the living room, then down the hallway toward my bedroom, the same path the intruder had taken earlier. As I approached my bedroom door, which now stood slightly ajar, I noticed something odd about the footprints. They stopped abruptly in the middle of the hallway, as if the officer had simply vanished into thin air. A soft sound emanated from my bedroom, a scratching noise, similar to what I'd heard earlier that night. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I pushed the door open wider. My bedroom was empty, but the window was open, curtains billowing in the wind. Rain had soaked the area beneath the window, and muddy footprints led from the windowsill to my bed. On the pristine white comforter, written in what looked like mud or something darker, was a message: "I'm still watching." I backed away from the door, heart hammering against my ribs. Where was the officer? How had the intruder returned without being seen? And most importantly, what did they want from me? The lights in the house suddenly flickered, then went out completely, plunging me back into darkness. In the silence that followed, I heard it again. That same whisper from before, now seemingly coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Welcome home, Emma. I've been waiting for you to come back."